The house still smelled like lilies. Dante hated lilies. He used to joke that they smelled like sadness, like hospitals and endings. And now, here they were, wilting in crystal vases across every flat surface in the living room, soft petals curling inward, like the slow collapse of a life I hadn't begun to live without him. I was still wearing the black dress from the funeral when Reena came in. She didn't knock, just pushed open the kitchen door and let herself in like she always had, setting her leather purse on the counter with a sharp, deliberate click. Her heels tapped once on the tile floor before she turned to face me, arms crossed. That expression on her face, the one that meant she'd already decided, and my part was just to agree. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk." I was pouring coffee into one of the chipped mugs Dante used to call his lucky cup, the one with the faded blue rim. My hands trembled. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since the funeral. "Of course, honey," I said gently. "Is everything okay? This arrangement, it's not working anymore." I blinked. "What arrangement? You living here?" She said, her tone clipped efficient. "Daddy left everything to me and I can't afford to support 2 households. I have bills. I have Carter and the boys. I can't carry you too." The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering across the tile in a splash of brown and porcelain. "It's been 3 weeks, I whispered. 3 weeks, Reena." "He was your father." "I know," she said, not even glancing at the mess. "But life doesn't stop. You have to start pulling your weight." "I get Social Security," I said quickly. $800 a month, I can. That barely covers groceries. It's not enough." I crouched to pick up the shard's knees, stiff fingers shaking. I didn't realize I was bleeding until I saw the red blooming through a napkin. She stood above me, arms folded, unmoved. "I've found a solution," she said. "A job." I looked up, swallowing my pride. "A job, live-in domestic support. You'll be helping someone disabled with basic tasks. Nothing medical. They need someone mature. It's a good salary and comes with housing." She pulled out her phone and held it toward me like a peace offering. "You have an interview tomorrow." I rose slowly, gripping the edge of the counter for balance. "And if I say no," Reena's expression didn't change, "then you'll have to find somewhere else to live." She picked up her purse and walked out the same way she came in. I stood there, surrounded by the smell of dying lilies and bitter coffee, trying to remember the last time someone had spoken to me like I mattered. The next morning, I stood at the gates of Hallberg Estate. The iron gates groaned open like something out of a dream, or maybe a warning. I stood at the edge of the long, winding driveway, gravel, crunching beneath my worn heels, clutching my purse like it held the last pieces of my dignity. The estate loomed ahead, pale stone, and wide windows draped in the kind of elegance I'd only ever seen in magazines in dentist offices. A black car idled near the front steps. The driver glanced at me but said nothing. I must have looked like the help. I was the help. I rang the bell and waited. My breath fogged in the crisp morning air, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished glass-creased dress, graying curls tucked beneath a sensible scarf, and eyes that hadn't known rest since Dante died. The door opened. A woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and straight-backed, greeted me with a nod. "Mrs. Mercer." "Yes." "Elaine, I'm Carla, house manager. Mr. Hallberg will see you now." I followed her inside, my footsteps soft against the marble floors. The air smelled like lavender and polish, expensive and cold. Paintings lined the halls, portraits, mostly the kind that stared back at you like they knew too much. Carla led me through a grand corridor to a heavy oak door and paused with her hand on the knob. "Mr. Hallberg is particular," she said, "but fair when treated with respect. He's had 17 caregivers in the last 2 years." She didn't wait for my reaction. The door opened to a wide room lined with books and tall windows that flooded everything in gold light. By the far window sat a man in a wheelchair, his back to us still as stone. "Mr. Hallberg," Carla said. "This is Mrs. Mercer." He turned. For a moment I forgot to breathe. He was older, of course, white-haired skin, weathered, but the structure of his face hadn't changed. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of slate before a storm. Familiar? Uncomfortably so. "Please," he said, his voice smooth, deep. "Have a seat." I sat across from him in a wingback chair. His gaze didn't leave my face. "You've done domestic work before?" he asked. "I was a nurse," I said quietly, "before marriage, but I haven't worked in decades." "And you're not afraid of the demands of live-in care?" I met his eyes. "No." He studied me. I saw something flicker in his expression, something like recognition, but it passed too quickly to catch. "You'd start tomorrow," he said. "Room and board included." "Salary?" He named a figure that made my throat tighten. "That's more than generous. I don't keep people who don't belong here," he said. "But I give chances to those who do." He extended his hand. I took it, and the moment our skin touched a current, moved through me, too soft to be real, too strong to ignore. "Welcome to Hallberg Estate, Mrs. Mercer." That night, unpacking in my quarters, I found the photo album I hadn't meant to bring. The guest suite was larger than my entire first apartment with Dante. Polished wood floors, pale linens, and thick curtains that muffled the sound of the world outside. Everything in the room was curated, quiet luxury, and yet I felt like a trespasser among someone else's still life. I sat on the edge of the bed as Carla gave me the briefest tour. "This drawer for linens, this switch for the chandelier breakfast is at 7 sharp coffee at 7:15. Mr. Hallberg," she added, with a raised brow, "is particular about that." I nodded. She left me with a polite but chilly, "Good night, Mrs. Mercer," and the door clicked softly behind her. The silence in the room stretched. I opened my suitcase, needing something familiar to fill the emptiness. My clothes were folded too neatly. Reena had packed them like she was boxing up a donation. I reached for the smaller bag where I'd stuffed personal things, a pair of reading glasses, my wedding band, a hairbrush missing half its teeth, and near the bottom, a worn bundle wrapped in tissue paper. I hadn't meant to bring it. The photo album had been on my nightstand at home, something I'd flipped through in those sleepless hours after Dante passed. I must have tucked it into the bag without thinking. My fingers hesitated at the edges before pulling back the wrapping. The leather cover was cracked, its corners frayed. I opened it slowly. There we were, me at 20, in a yellow sundress I'd sewn myself. My hair was long, pulled back with a ribbon. And standing beside me, his arm around my waist, smiling like the world had handed him every dream he ever wanted, was Victor Hallberg. Not in name, not back then. Back then, he was just Vic, the boy who played jazz records in the park and kissed me under the bridge during summer storms. The boy who promised to make something of himself to come back for me, once he had more than charm in his pockets. I stared at that photograph until my eyes blurred. We'd taken it at the county fair. He'd won me a stuffed rabbit at the ring toss and kissed my temple just as the camera clicked. His smile in the photo, it was the same one I saw this morning, hidden beneath the age and wear, but unmistakable. My chest tightened. He hadn't recognized me. Or maybe he had. Maybe that look in his eyes, half confusion, half familiarity, meant something more than I'd let myself believe. I turned the pages, each one a flash of a time I thought I'd buried. Dancing barefoot in my old apartment, sitting beside him at the lake, his hand in mine, our last day together standing on the train platform. He said he'd write. I waited. Then nothing. I closed the album, slowly pressing the cover flat with trembling hands. I'd mourned him like a myth, convinced he'd let go. But he hadn't vanished into memory. He had become the man in the next room. By the third morning, I noticed Victor stopped calling me Mrs. Mercer. He'd begun saying Elaine softly, like he was tasting the name, And when he said it, something inside me pulled taut familiar, but too dangerous to examine in full daylight. I kept to my tasks. I made his coffee at 7:15, folded his paper just the way he liked, and said little more than necessary. But he kept watching me. At breakfast, he asked where I grew up. I lied. Or at least I softened the truth. Small towns mostly. Moved around a bit. Ever live near Arliss Creek? He asked, too casually. My spoon paused midair. I've heard of it. There was a diner there, he said, eyes drifting to the window. Murphy's. Cherry Cokes were too sweet. You used to ask for vanilla syrup instead. Said it gave it dignity. My mouth went dry. He glanced back at me steady. You wore a yellow sundress to the county fair and danced barefoot in the gravel lot while the band played Ellington. I set down the spoon. You knew the whole time. I wasn't sure. Not until yesterday. The way you said goodnight, it hit me. I swallowed. Then why didn't you say anything? He leaned back, hands folded in his lap. Because I didn't know if you'd want to remember me. We sat in the quiet hum of morning for a long time. I thought you left, I whispered. I waited 2 years. Then I met Dante. He was safe. I never stopped writing, Victor said, voice low. They told me you'd moved on. That you weren't answering. My partners intercepted the letters. They thought a small-town girl would ruin my focus. You let them. I didn't know until it was too late. I stared at the man in front of me, trying to reconcile him with the boy from the photos. He looked the same, and yet nothing was the same. I loved you, I said finally. And I hated you for forgetting me. I never did, he said. Not for a day. My hands trembled. I folded them in my lap to keep from reaching for him. I'm not the girl from that photo anymore. I'm not the boy who left on a train, he said. Neither of us smiled. But something passed between us. Then something real. A thread of the old us, still breathing beneath all the years. The next day, I moved his coffee 2 inches to the left, and he noticed. I was arranging the flowers in the sitting room when I heard the front door slam. Carla didn't call out to me, which meant it wasn't a delivery or a friend of the staff. Only one person walked into a stranger's house like she owned it. Mother Reena's voice snapped across the marble like a whip. I turned slowly. She stood in the entryway, wearing her fitted blazer, like armor eyes locked on me with the kind of fury that didn't come from confusion, it came from certainty. I just ran into Mrs. Penrose at the farmer's market, she said, walking toward me without invitation. She says you've been seen grocery shopping with a man in a wheelchair, holding hands. I opened my mouth, but she cut me off. I told her she was mistaken. That my mother is employed by that man, not... She looked around the room with thinly veiled disgust. Not involved. I'm not ashamed of being seen with Victor, I said evenly. Oh, you're on a first-name basis now. Victor's voice rose from the hallway behind her. We've known each other a long time, Miss Ford. Reena turned, startled. She hadn't expected him to be listening. He rolled forward, calm as ever, stopping just beside me. Would you like to discuss this civilly, or should I call Carla to show you out? Reena flushed, but held her ground. Mr. Hallberg, I mean no disrespect, but my mother has been vulnerable since my father's passing. I worry she's mistaking grief for affection. Victor's face didn't move, but his voice chilled. And you believe I'm taking advantage of that? I believe my mother is not thinking clearly. And I believe your wealth clouds the situation. He didn't blink. To clarify, you think your mother is seducing me for money? Reena didn't answer. The silence was enough. Victor turned his chair to face her fully. Then let me simplify things for you. As of last week, I've amended my will. Upon my death, all assets, real estate investments, art, everything will be donated to a network of nonprofits I've supported for years. Reena's mouth parted. Excuse me. She will receive nothing. Not because she asked for nothing, but because she never wanted anything but my company. I stepped forward, voice firm. I don't want his money, Reena. I never did. I'm not here to take anything from anyone. You're my mother, she said, almost like it hurt to say aloud. You're supposed to be mourning, not chasing some fantasy from the past. I met her eyes. And what am I supposed to do after the mourning ends? Sit in the guest room of your house and shrink until I disappear? She didn't answer, just looked at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become. Victor broke the silence. You're welcome to stay for tea if you'd like. Otherwise, I believe your mother has work to finish. Reena stood there for another moment before turning and walking out without a word. I didn't watch her leave. I just reached for the vase again, replacing the wilting stems with fresh ones from the garden. It was nearly dusk when Reena returned. No announcement this time, no clattering heels or cold demands, just a soft knock on the kitchen door, and a daughter who looked suddenly older than I remembered. I was slicing apples for a tart. The silence that followed her entrance was thick but not hostile. She didn't sit, just stood by the counter, fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. I found something, she said finally. In one of Dad's boxes. I wasn't looking for it. I set down the knife. She reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of folded letters worn at the creases, rubber banded together. She placed them gently on the counter like they might bruise. They're from a woman named Meredith, she said. They go back years. At least 2, maybe more. I stared at the letters, but didn't reach for them. I thought you should know, she added, her voice thinner now. I thought maybe it would explain things. Explain what I didn't ask. The coldness. The late nights. The way Dante had begun to fade from me long before he got sick. I don't know how to feel, she said, eyes shining. I loved him. I believed in the 2 of you. And now I did too, I said quietly. For a long time, I believed the love we had was enough, even when it grew quiet. She didn't argue, didn't try to defend him. She just nodded and looked at me like maybe for the first time she saw the woman behind the role I'd played her whole life. I picked up the letters, but didn't open them. I didn't need to read the words to know what they meant. Maybe it was real, I said, and maybe it wasn't. But either way, it's finished. And I don't have to keep grieving a version of something that never fully belonged to me. Reena wiped at her cheek and let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Are you angry? No, I said. And I meant it. I think I'm done being angry. I think I'm finally free. We stood in silence for a moment, the kind that settles when nothing needs fixing. Then I folded the letters and slid them back across the counter. You can keep them, I said. I don't need ghosts in my drawers. That night, when Victor rolled into the sunroom and asked if I wanted to listen to Ella Fitzgerald on vinyl, I said yes, without hesitation. Victor waited until after dinner. We'd taken to eating in the smaller dining room, just the 2 of us, no formalities. I'd made salmon with lemon and dill, and he'd asked for a second helping, which was rare. When the plates were cleared and the coffee poured, he looked at me with that steady gaze he always saved for when the words mattered more than the timing. I don't want to play roles anymore, he said. Not employer, not guest, not caretaker. I'm too old to pretend. I didn't speak. I let him finish. I don't need a wedding. I don't need a minister or paperwork or a ring unless you want one. What I need is you. In this house. In my life. Not as someone passing through, but as the person I end the day beside. I looked down at my hands. They were older than the hands I remembered from that yellow sundress photograph, lined and dry and spotted, but they still reached for his without hesitation. Yes, I said. His eyes glistened, but he only nodded. Then move into the West Wing. It's too quiet there without you. 2 days later, Carla helped me settle into the master suite. She didn't ask questions, just brought in my belongings and placed fresh tulips on the nightstand. We didn't make a big announcement. There was no need. The rhythm of our days shifted without ceremony. I took my meals with Victor, read beside him in the sunroom, left my robe hanging on the back of his bathroom door. Sometimes we played old records and danced well. I danced, and he held my hand while I moved slowly around him. Sometimes we sat in silence and didn't need to fill it. One morning, I brought him his coffee and kissed his temple before he could thank me. He touched my hand and whispered, "I've waited 48 years for the sound of your voice in the morning." I stayed beside him that day long after breakfast was done, and when Reena's number lit up my phone that afternoon, I didn't ignore it. I answered. It was early spring when Reena returned, this time with her children in tow. They came with backpacks and juice boxes and a kind of hesitant energy that only kids carry when they've been told to behave somewhere fancy. Reena didn't apologize. She didn't need to. She stepped onto the porch, kissed my cheek, and said, "I want them to know." The woman who taught me that strength doesn't always look like silence. I brought out lemonade and a plate of oatmeal cookies. The kids sat on the porch steps giggling over something Victor said about growing up before television. He was good with them, patient, funny, sharper than people assumed. And when the porch swing creaked too loudly, Reena rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside him to fix it. No eye rolls, no sighs. Just a quiet kind of care. I stood in the garden with a handful of wildflowers watching them. My daughter. My partner. The ghosts behind me finally quiet. For the first time in years, my family didn't look like a picture I had to squint at to believe. It looked real. Worn and mended in places, but stitched together by something stronger than duty choice. I placed the flowers in a vase on the kitchen table and turned toward the door, the sound of children's laughter echoing behind me. What would you do if your second chance came dressed as a job you didn't want? Would you dare to choose love again, even if no one else believed in it?